A lot of times, especially in fighting, there's not just one track motion. We're not just moving in a sagittal plane. We're moving all the way around, and a lot of it is rotation.
Right.
So we do a lot of rotational power movements with the actual jumping. Because if you look at it, when I'm trying to do a takedown or I'm trying to transition into maybe takedown into a strike, I need to be able to redirect force and go into another pattern as efficient as possible and fast.
Yo, what's going on, guys? Chris Bonner here, Overtime Athletes. I'm back with my brother, Phil Daru. I appreciate you, man. Just kind of spitball with me and walk me through your must-have exercises during a camp when you're developing a fighter. You know, you handle everything from top to bottom, depending on the fighter, but from a performance standpoint, give me like, 3 to 5 of the ones that you gotta have in your camp.
We definitely gotta have plyometrics in there. Whether that be, low-level plyos all the way up into your higher dynamic movements, your multi-directional patterns, things like that. A lot of it's gonna be lateral force displacement because we're in that like bladed position.
Right.
And we gotta get in and out of the pocket fast. Even horizontal, right? When you're talking about blast doubles and things like that from a grappling standpoint, or just takedowns in general.
A lot of variations of
A lot of variations of plyometrics, a lot of the stuff that you do. You my brother, so I've watched you do plenty of crazy stuff. So
people don't know we talk a lot behind.
Yeah.
We've always, mixed it up as far as, trade secrets and stuff like that. And I noticed a lot of carryover from both, you know what I mean, globally.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I've actually took a lot from you as far as the single leg stuff. 100%.
Yeah.
So all variations. Do you ever touch vertical?
Yeah, definitely. And we'll obviously do a baseline assessment. We use a jump mat for that too as well. And then I'll kind of correlate, progressions off of what they can do. It'll start off with, first with absorption of force, and then from there we can redirect. And then I'll start to implement like vertical to horizontal or vertical to lateral, right?
Got it. Love
so
it.
I do want them to be able to be versatile, right? And have the ability to transition into other movements, because a lot of times, especially in fighting, there's not just one track motion. We're not just moving in a sagittal plane. We're moving all the way around, and a lot of it is rotational.
Right.
So we do a lot of rotational power movements with the actual jumping. So we'll do rotational power with maybe a med ball throw.
Okay.
We'll do a tall kneeling tuck jump into a lateral push with a rotation.
Okay.
So we add on to these things, because if you look at it, when I'm trying to do a takedown or I'm trying to transition into maybe takedown into a strike, I need to be able to redirect force and go into another pattern as efficient as possible and fast.
Right, love it. So plyometrics across the board, that's something you incorporate throughout the entire camp.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. What else we got?
Foundational patterns. So squat, hinge, right? Press, pull, lunge. Right, so I do like to use special exercises that have some transfer. And then anything that's going to elicit a better stimulus for the athlete. They gotta have the proper joint prerequisites. They gotta have the right tools for them, right? So as long as we're doing some type of squat, some type of hinge, right? Some type of lunging pattern, whether that be lateral lunge or frontal plane or whatever. We also want to make sure that we are doing something that is going to be a press and a pull motion, right? Because they are punching, right? And they also have to make sure that they maintain a solid structure and posture with their upper back. So a lot of posterior chain work. Right? So that's going to be anything like row variations. I like to do Pendlay rows for that, starting in a concentric action. Also just strict pull-ups, right? A lot of times we'll use different grip mechanisms too as well, so that we can work the grip and also work the upper back. I like the reverse hyper. If you guys have that, that's something that has been a staple for us. Obviously, when it comes down to fighting, you're getting beat up, right? And any athlete, they're getting a lot of structural damage, right? Especially if it's a high contact sport like football, right? And MMA. So we want to, when they get in the weight room, we want to make sure that we're recovering, we're restoring their function and their structure.
Right. So primal patterns from a balance perspective, is there any of those patterns that from a fighter perspective you tend to tip the scale to? Sounds like posterior chain, is that correct?
I like to do a 2-to-1 ratio of posterior to anterior. And the reason why is because a lot of these guys are working so much anteriorly. They're punching, right? They're moving forward. And in order for me to balance out and be a true practitioner and a performance coach, we want to make sure that we're covering all aspects and we're plugging in gaps that they're not getting inside of their skills training.
So balancing out from a rotational standpoint, because obviously, but they're rotating not just like a baseball athlete where it's one side. They're rotating off both, depending on if they're southpaw,
orthodox.
So are you looking at the fighter, looking at a needs analysis from that perspective, and then balancing out rotational movements and stuff like that based off of that?
Absolutely. We'll start off with a basic postural analysis too. So I'll get to see all the way up the kinetic chain.
So based off of each athlete.
Exactly. It has to be. And then, a lot of times we're looking to tie in rotation through the oblique sling, the lateral chain, and then anything that's weak in certain areas, like the adductors primarily, or they're, because a lot of times these guys are externally rotated in their hips. So we want to work on internal rotation. We want to give them the things that they don't have in order for them to be a better, well-rounded athlete that can transfer over into the fight game.
And like we were talking about, you're unlocking things that they didn't know now that they can use, obviously, and that's when you become the miracle worker. They come back to you and say, what the hell, I was able to do something I wasn't able to do before.
The best thing, and you know this, is that they come to you and they say, well, I was feeling I was out of position because of my connection to my body now, right? So if they're in a bad position, not just being an experienced fighter, but knowing their own biomechanics and their own structural integrity. Like they know how to put themselves in a better position to have better leverage. Not just because they're experienced fighters, but also because they're more in tune with their body.
Right, love it. We were talking previously, you obviously, I know that you're a huge fan of the Zurcher. Is that one of those things that's a must-have throughout? Do you progress that, or do you, to me, when I look at it from the outside in, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Right? And I truly believe it's been around for a long time, but I believe that you really ignited that movement back. It's not a pretty movement. If you've ever performed
really not, man.
It fucking sucks.
And like bars that are like Olympic style bars, they suck.
Oh,
like they cut into your elbows.
Right.
So we like to use fat bars and like more of the axle bars for that, or elbow sleeves. And again, they have to have the proper joint prerequisites to do it. And then also you don't want their elbows to be beat up, or they tendonitis built up. So it is put in, but it's put in sparingly. Right? I'm not doing it weeks on end.
Gotcha.
And then I'll change up the variations based upon the intensity of the lift. Right? So like I use a lot of condensed conjugate, it's just what I kind of coined, but conjugate in general, where we're working through, or at least working up to a 1 repetition max, or the highest force that they can produce, because a lot of times they don't get that in their skills training, and it's something that a lot of those guys actually need to learn how to strain. If we are gonna do a Zurcher, we're gonna not attempt to do that the next week. We're gonna go ahead and switch the variation, maybe switch even the bar, switch the stance, so we can have constant variation, so we can avoid the law of accommodation. Right, or accommodation itself. And then from there, like I'm looking at their ability to get underneath the bar, right? So I like safety bars, or SSB bars, right, for the shoulders, because they're, the shoulders are getting beat up. A lot of them lack that external rotation of the shoulder, so we want to make sure that we're at least getting them in the best position to exhibit force without, putting any more damage to the shoulder. Obviously, we work on mobility, we work on corrective exercise, and then we try to
load without holding them back, as far as like performing a back squat or something like that.
Yeah, we want to give them the tools that they can use to get the stimulus adaptation.
Absolutely. So from a lower body perspective, obviously, if they can't get there, it's not that we throw that stimulus out, we just use a different variation to be able to get it.
If you're in this game for a long time like you are, you understand like there's certain things that you can and cannot do per individual, right? And it all comes back to the assessment process and understanding the athlete. Your tools that you use are going to be dictated off of the individual, right? So, and you work with a lot of groups, right? I used to work with a lot of groups back in the day with Top Team. What I would do is I would have a system ready to go, and it would be a skeleton approach, but then it would be individualized based upon the tools, based upon the exercise selection, or based upon where they're at in camp, and individual differences in that sense.
So is there anything else as far as like must-haves? I know you talk about modalities. I know you basically check every single box. You leave no stone unturned. Is there any other ones that are like you gotta have in their program?
I mean,
especially even with these combat athletes, we've seen a huge wave of your, I don't want to say casual, but ones that aren't competing that are getting into it. So speaking to them, I know we got a lot of those viewers that might do it kind of recreationally. What are some things that they should focus on if they're going to a weight room?
I mean, you want to increase relative strength. So also being able to do pull-ups and push-ups and things like that, body weight only. A lot of people lack that ability to actually pull their own body weight up. Right? So like basic chin-ups and pull-ups are definitely something that we actually want to hit upon. A lot of the guys, they either lack it or they don't hit it because of injury. So one, we get them into the position where they can, we get them the range of motion, we get them the mobility, and then from there we want to stimulate the muscle that helps for that to occur. Another thing is obviously pulling something off the ground or from a dead stop or static to dynamic movement, because a lot of times, like, let's say from a sport specific standpoint, you know, you're going to be in a static position and then you have to explode into a dynamic position and maintain that dynamic capability. So doing things like, you know, rack pulls, or doing things like an Anderson squat, or doing things like just a simple deadlift. I like the trap bar that you use, right? It puts it in the midline of the body. A lot of the guys lack that ability to extend through the T-spine. So this will definitely help trying to transfer that over and keep them erect as much as possible so that they can produce force into the ground. And then I will force new range of motion. So we use like sumo deadlifts, right? To increase that hip range of motion and to get lateral force displacement, because again, that will have correlation over to combat sports.
Yeah, now last question going into like how you're leading up to camp. How specific, you know, from my world, it's, you know, with these certain athletes, when you get into that last kind of peak, what are we doing from a resistance standpoint? How specific do you actually get when you throw in variation? Not saying everybody needs to be doing it, but like how far are you going?
I think specificity is correlated through time domains and the bioenergetics of the actual sport. We're not usually trying to simulate actual fight practice inside the weight room. We're trying to give them the range of motion, the planes of motion, maybe the tension gradients that they're gonna have to do inside the sport, but I'm not simulating a punching pattern with weights and things like that. What I want to do is I want to give them directed correlation through exercises that are general in nature. And then those special exercises where we, you know, maybe load a certain position, but it's not going to be at the detriment of their actual biomechanics inside of the sport.
100%. So everything's transference, but nothing's necessarily mimicking exactly what you're doing. Because now you're doubling down what they're already doing outside of you. I love it.
Now, as far as like the conditioning standpoint, that's another thing that we have to look at. We have to look at their overall limitations from an energy systems like perspective. A lot of these guys, for the most part, have more of the ability to like explode and then explode again, right? So power endurance, right? But then again, they're missing a lot of that durability. They're missing the overall endurance factor of aerobic capacity, right? Or the ability to deliver oxygen. So some days I'll have to pull them back and have them do some type of low intensity cardio so that we can get blood flow, and also for restorative work. So especially with the fighters that come from a background of wrestling or something that is explosive, or even a football player that transitions into fighting. That's from myself, right? Played for Alabama State, played linebacker. All I knew was explode and then be able to recover. That didn't work, especially when you're sparring somebody like a Dean Thomas. You explode and then he's tagging you up after you start to rest. So you have to be able to sustain that output, and a lot of times you have to have a steady flow of utilization of oxygen and delivery of that oxygen.
And I don't think people realize how much you have to be integrated when you're working with a fighter in camp, because you have to basically accommodate for everything they're doing over a 24-hour span. You're literally on a day-to-day basis making progressions and regressions and figuring out when you can push, when you need to pull back. And it's almost like you're taking an audit every single day that they come to you of where are we at, what are we doing? And I thought that was something amazing, that kind of pulling back the curtains. I know we're getting a little off topic from the original video, but I thought that was fascinating because I didn't realize how integrated you had to be. Speaking on that, is there something that they can take away as far as like checking their stress, making sure that from a conditioning, because that's everything for them, right?
Yeah, so we use subjective and objective indicators. But for the people listening and watching, a subjective indicator is something like your dynamic movement, right? Your coordination, right? How well you feel when you wake up. Are you tired when you wake up? Is it hard for you to go to sleep at night? Right? Is your heart rate like enhanced or increased in your resting heart rate from baseline, right? So usually you take your resting heart rate, you get a baseline for a week, right? Then from there you can test it every day. Now, if you wake up one day and you feel like crap, right? And your heart rate has spiked about 7 to 8 beats, that's usually an indication that you are somewhat stressed and you need to bring down the actual training that day. Another thing would be like your ability to jump high, right? So if you had like a jump mat or something that's gonna measure your jump quality or your jump height, If that's down 10%, that's usually another indication.
Gotcha.
A good indication, if you have like an ice bath, you can just take your hand, dip it in the water, right? And if you're in a high sympathetic state, dip your hand all the way to your wrist, and it spikes up about 10 beats within a minute. That's an indication that you are
I've never heard that one.
Yeah,
I
that's,
like that.
That's another sympathetic response.
Right.
That is, obviously, that's showing that you are a little bit more stressed than usual.
Gotcha. Dude, you're a fucking encyclopedia of knowledge, man. I appreciate you, my brother.
Appreciate
I could
you, bro.
talk to you all day. Hey, I hope that helps. I'll go ahead and drop a link down to his channel down below. That's my man, Phil Daru. Check him out, and I'll holler at you guys next time.